Welcome back to the Frank Roche Show. This is Frank. Glad to have you with me. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, tell your friends and family to do the same. It's been a while since I'm able to get a podcast out. Life takes over, as you know. So what's on my mind today? When it comes to managing inflation and the Fed's effort to reduce rates of inflation, the Democrats on the fiscal side are not doing much to help the Federal Reserve. As I've said to you prior, the fiscal policy machine is in expansionary mode. The monetary policy machine is in contractionary mode. And that doesn't help either side. They're both weakening the efforts of each other. And of course, what we really need right now is contractionary policy by both the fiscal side and the monetary side to take down inflation. You continue to hear talk from blue state governors about more stimulus checks, direct payments to households. President Biden has just announced that he's going to boost supplemental Social Security checks by 3.5%. Promises to send out two $900 checks in the next few months to those recipients. Of course, this is a cost of living adjustment, but still, again, very inflationary. The president has announced more student loan forgiveness. You remember he tried to forgive all student loans, but the Supreme Court slapped him down. Well, now, a little sleight of hand on the Biden administration. The president and his education department leader, Miguel Cardona, have come up with a little sneaky plan, have transformed the education department repayment program into a brand new entitlement program. So this is how loan forgiveness is going to work. The monthly payments of hundreds of thousands of borrowers will be capped at 5% of discretionary income. And if they pay those installments, which are going to be very small, for 10 to 20 years, their entire remaining loan will be wiped out. Some may find they owe $0. We're expecting about $500 billion in costs here. So I premise this conversation on inflation and battling inflation and what the Democrats are not doing to help that situation. Now we have moral hazard, adverse selection, and putting the burden of paying back student loans on every taxpayer, many of whom never chose to go to college, didn't take out any student loans. And this is a giveaway to the middle class and the upper class in America. Now, it's a political year. Bidenomics is not working as hoped. It has become a pejorative word, as indicated by Leanne Caldwell of the Washington Post, who was on Meet the Press just recently. She said, like all of us know, that Bidenomics has become a negative word. It's not working. And we know it's not working, even though we got a big boost in GDP in Q3 at 5.2%, way above expectations, largely driven solely by excessive spending in Washington, D.C., not by the consumer, not by the investor, not by net exports. And so the Biden administration, the Democrats, are doing all they can to juice the economy in efforts to help re-election efforts in 2024. So Leanne Caldwell went on to say that she's hearing from lots of Democrats that things are not good, that the messaging is not good, that Bidenomics is not good, and that he's going to lose swing states because of his proposals, because of his policies. So Leanne Caldwell goes on to say that they have a lot of work to do. Once again, like I said, try to get credit for the successes that he's had over the past 2 years, which he keeps on getting blamed for everything bad that's happening. And I want to focus on getting credit for the successes he's had over the past 2 years. He has not had any successes over the past 2 years, unless you count 3 legislative bills that he passed with Democrat support only, very little Republican support, as successes. But those bills were not successes. You don't get credit for passing legislation that we can't afford, that puts us into $1 trillion worth of debt. That's not governance. Governance is working within your means, not imperiling future generations to massive debt burdens. We had the $1.85 trillion Build Back Better plan. We had the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we had the $400 billion Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with reducing inflation and was really just a Green New Deal. We have the student loan gimmick to convince young people to vote for him. Hey, don't forget, I did this for you. In fact, the Biden administration sent out emails to people who are going to see this forgiveness. And it said, your student loan has been forgiven because of actions by my administration took to make sure you receive the relief you earned and deserve, read the White House message sent to inboxes on Tuesday, according to the dailymail.com. Think about that you earned and deserve. In what way did any borrower for a student loan earn or deserve debt relief? How have they earned debt relief? Shall we check GPAs? Shall we check what degrees they got? Shall we check if they finished school? And what is this deserve stuff? No one was forced to take out a student loan. Absolutely no one. It was voluntary completely. It's a really bad public policy. The bottom line is what I'm getting to is that the Democrats are doing nothing to help the Federal Reserve manage high rates of inflation. Thankfully, the Federal Reserve has stayed its course, increasing the federal funds rate up to 5.5%. And thankfully, through that method, they have been successful in bringing down the rates of inflation, but they remain very high, very elevated, way above the Fed's target. In fact, we had a GDP data release for the third quarter. The second revision for the third quarter was out just the other day, showing GDP for the third quarter on a real basis, annualized 5.2%. So the quarterly is divided by 12. The price index for that period, 3.5%. Recent CPI and PPI data, 3.5% year over year. We still have an inflation problem. The Fed can't be done. I know there's lots of people out there cheering for the Fed to stop raising rates. Those are people that don't want to see the stock market go down. And as I've said before, I think the Fed has taken on a new mandate, and that is plunge protection in the stock market. In any event, this idea that the president has had successes, it's just not true. You can't plunge the country into, what is that, 3.2, nearly $4 trillion in debt in 2 years and say you've had successes. So back to the GDP number, 5.2%, good news to be sure, but again, driven largely by government spending. And what I mean by that is deficit spending, imperiling future generations. What about the kids? All right, the next thing I want to talk about real quickly is Henry Kissinger. 100 years old, what a life. The guy lived quite a life, hobnobbed with the rich and famous, the power players, the who's who of the world for the past 50, 60 years. Escaped Germany during the Holocaust. Impressive life to be sure. You know, my heart's out to his family and friends. This couldn't have been completely unexpected. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld quips from time to time. People that live into their 90s or hundreds that pass away. He's like, that's enough already. But I'm not a fan of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, in many ways, imperiled the U.S. economy, set us on the stage of secular decline since the 1970s. With his advocacy for geopolitics and foreign policy over domestic economic considerations. For most of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even 2000s, we put geopolitics, foreign affairs over domestic economic outcomes. And Henry Kissinger was at the front of that with respect to China. I've just been studying coincidentally Henry Kissinger's 1974 memo to Richard Nixon, the president, about opening up China. Henry Kissinger was a big part of permanent normal trade relations with China in the late 1990s during the Bill Clinton administration. He is partly responsible for crushing America's middle class, for crushing America's manufacturing base. And again, lived an amazing life, thought he was doing well, thought he was doing the right thing, but he is responsible for a lot of the economic problems that we have in America with respect to jobs, middle class incomes, trade deficits. All right, I want to mention the 2024 race and Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley has been endorsed by the Koch brothers and their nonprofit, Americans for Prosperity. I'll make a quick segue here. You know, PACs are there to help candidates. But the laws say that PACs cannot coordinate with candidates or campaigns. And yet, based on the rhetoric I hear in the media, it sounds an awful lot like there is coordination. Anyway, the Koch brothers have come out in support of Nikki Haley, and they're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising and get out the vote efforts to help Nikki Haley win. They oppose Donald Trump, and they think Ron DeSantis has pushed too far in the culture wars. So they're not supporting Ron. But I would argue that America cannot afford Nikki Haley. Based on the rhetoric she's expressed over the many years since she was South Carolina governor, ambassador to the UN, since she left the UN, I believe Nikki Haley is another globalist, another neoconservative. We can't afford another globalist or another neoconservative. We can't afford any more wars. We can't afford putting America's domestic economy second to globalization issues. Now, she and Ron DeSantis are clinging to the idea that Donald Trump, while likely to get the nomination, will not be able to fulfill the nomination. That is to say, he might be in jail by the time that process comes, or by the time of the Republican National Convention, he has angered so many people so much more, or is at risk of going to jail, that there's a brokered convention and they elect someone else besides who the voters voted for, Donald Trump, in the primaries. But we can't afford another George Bush, which is what Nikki Haley is. Seems like a wonderful woman, has a lovely family, but I don't think her ideology, her view of the world, is going to be helpful for America. We can't afford more of this. After 4 years of the Biden administration and their management of our relationships with China, of course, immigration and control of our borders, we need who wants to focus on ensuring domestic economic prosperity in a way we haven't seen probably since the 1980s. And then lastly, a quick comment again on the Fed. Federal Reserve meets in December for their last meeting of the year. Speculation is right now they're likely not to raise rates again. I urge the Fed to raise rates to 5.75% in December. And if they don't do it in December, they should do it in January, February, or March of 2024. Inflation remains a problem. The lag effects of interest rates are becoming evident, but not sufficiently evident to bring down inflation to the target. And so there's lots of call for the Fed from the financial sector to stop raising rates, not to save the economy, mind you, but to save the stock market, to save hedge funds, to save pension funds, to save 401ks. And it sounds nice, but that's not the role of the Fed. And all those individuals, hedge funds, pension funds, 401ks, have financial risks they have to manage. This is a fairness issue. All right, that's all I have to complain about today. I'm Frank. This is Frank Roche Show. Always try to buy American.